wire transfer notification chimed on my phone, displaying a number with enough zeros to make my breath catch in my throat. It was the exact price of my replaceable expertise, a 7-figure penalty for one man's monumental arrogance. But to understand how a single clause in my termination contract became a multi-million-dollar check, we have to go back to the beginning. 3 years ago, I wasn't a victor. I was just a programmer, and a damn good one. My world was a landscape of glowing monitors in a perpetually dim corner of the Innovate Dynamics office. My kingdom was built from millions of lines of code, a digital universe I had created from a single blinking cursor. They called it OR, Automated Universal Retail Assistant. I just called it my baby. I was the sole architect, developer, and maintainer. OR wasn't just some off-the-shelf software. It was the company's central nervous system, a proprietary system I had designed and built from scratch. It managed everything: inventory intake, warehouse logistics, order processing, shipping manifests, and even predictive analytics for restocking. Before Aura, Innovate Dynamics was a chaotic mess of spreadsheets and human error. After, it was a sleek, ruthlessly efficient machine that hummed along, making money while everyone else slept. My life was a blur of caffeine, code, and commitment. I subsisted on vending machine snacks and the triumphant glow of a successfully compiled module. I remember the night I finally perfected the shipping algorithm. I'd been awake for 36 hours, surrounded by a graveyard of empty energy drink cans. When the test server returned a perfect, error-free result, I didn't just feel relief. I felt a profound sense of creation, of pride. I had given this company a heartbeat. I loved that system, not for the paycheck it generated, but for its elegant complexity, for the intellectual challenge it represented. I thought the company and its leadership loved me for it. That's where Mr. Sterling comes in. Richard Sterling was the CEO, a man who wore his $1,000 suits like armor and brandished a smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. He was the kind of leader who talked a lot about our corporate family, but couldn't remember the names of anyone outside the C-suite. He saw Aura not as a marvel of engineering, but as a number on a quarterly report, a very, very good number. My first real inkling of his true nature came on a Tuesday afternoon. He was doing one of his signature walkabouts, a transparent attempt to seem engaged with the rank and file. He glided through the office, dispensing hollow compliments, his expensive leather shoes barely making a sound on the industrial carpet. When he arrived at my desk, he gestured vaguely at my 4-monitor setup, which was displaying a waterfall of real-time server log data. "Anya, right?" he began, his eyes flicking to the nameplate on my cubicle wall for a fraction of a second too long. "Yes, Mr. Sterling." I swiveled in my chair, forcing a polite smile. "Incredible," he said, though he was looking past the code, past me, at some distant point on the wall. "Just incredible. I was in a meeting with the board, and the numbers from your, this Aura project are just phenomenal, truly." "Thank you," I said, a small bloom of pride warming my chest. "I'm just finishing a patch to optimize the inventory to shipping pipeline. It should shave another 6% off our processing time." He nodded, his expression unchanged, as if I just told him I was ordering new staples. "Excellent, excellent, it's a real asset. We push the button, and the magic happens. The whole team is doing a fantastic job." He patted the top of my primary monitor, a gesture that felt strangely condescending, as if he were patting a faithful, unthinking appliance. The phrase "we push the button" snagged in my mind. We? There was no we. There was me. There were the years of my life I had poured into this system, the sleepless nights, the sacrificed weekends. He saw a magic button. I saw my life's work. He saw the result. I was the engine he didn't care to understand. As he walked away, trailing a wake of expensive cologne, a cold knot of unease settled in my stomach. He didn't see me. He saw a function, a tool that produced profit. And I was beginning to realize that in his world, tools were, by their very nature, disposable. That cold knot of unease in my stomach festered for months. Aura continued to be a golden goose, and my name was occasionally mentioned in all-hands meetings, usually as an afterthought to a chart showing record-breaking profits. I tried to ignore the condescension, to focus on the work. I was due a massive 7-figure performance bonus at the end of the fiscal year, a number explicitly tied to AURA's profit generation in my employment contract. It was life-changing money, the kind of money that validated the years of sacrifice. I told myself that would be my real reward. I just had to make it to the end of Q4. The summons came on a Friday, an hour before closing time, an email from Sterling's assistant with the subject line, Urgent, Aura Strategic Review. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This had to be the meeting about my bonus, about expanding the AURA team, maybe even giving me a director title. I smoothed down my sweater, took a deep breath, and walked toward the glass-walled C-suite, a lamb walking toward a very expensive, well-appointed slaughterhouse. Sterling's office was on the top floor, a sterile expanse of chrome and black leather that overlooked the entire city. He wasn't alone. A woman I vaguely recognized from Human Resources sat stiffly in one of the guest chairs, a thin, forced smile on her face. Sterling was standing by the window, his back to me. "Anya, come in, sit," he said without turning around. The casual command set my teeth on edge. I sat next to the HR woman, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Finally, he turned, that same plastic smile plastered on his face. "Aura has been an unprecedented success," he began, pacing slowly. "It has fundamentally transformed this company. We're more efficient, more profitable, and our shareholders are ecstatic." "I'm glad it's performing so well," I said, my voice sounding smaller than I wanted. "Yes, it's a robust, stable platform now, a real turnkey solution," he continued, his eyes gliding over me as if I were a piece of furniture. "And because it's so stable, we've decided to move into the next phase of its life cycle. We're transitioning its maintenance to a junior development team offshore. It's a significant cost-saving measure." The air left my lungs in a silent rush. Offshore? A junior team? They wouldn't know the first thing about the system's architecture. It would crumble within a month. "Mr. Sterling, with all due respect, Aura isn't a turnkey solution. It requires constant high-level oversight, the predictive algorithms alone. That," he cut in, holding up a hand, "is no longer your concern. As part of this restructuring, your position as lead architect has become redundant." Redundant. The word hit me like a physical blow. I looked from his cold eyes to the HR woman, who was now pushing a thick folder across the polished table toward me, my severance package. My position?" I stammered, my mind scrambling. "But Aura is my position. I built it." "And we thank you for your service," he said, the words utterly meaningless. "You built a fine product. Now the company will take it from here." My shock was rapidly being replaced by a hot, white-hot fury, the bonus, the money they owed me. "My contract," I said, my voice shaking. "My performance bonus for Q4. The system's profits were record-breaking. It's over $1 million. Sterling actually chuckled. It was a dry, ugly sound. "The bonus is for employees, Anya. As of this moment, you are no longer an employee. It's discretionary and reserved for the team moving forward." "That's theft," I whispered, horrified. "That money was earned. I earned it." He stopped pacing and leaned his hands on the desk, bringing his face closer to mine. His voice dropped, losing its corporate polish and revealing the raw contempt beneath. "You wrote code. You did the job we paid you a salary for. The real value was unlocked by my strategy, my leadership. You think you're owed $1 million windfall for just doing your job? You don't deserve it." He straightened up, adjusting his tie. "You are a talented coder, Anya, but you are replaceable. We have the asset. We no longer need the architect." I couldn't even speak. My whole world had just been dismantled by this man's breathtaking arrogance. This is the part of the story, the moment of pure injustice, that still makes my blood boil when I think about it. And if you're just finding my channel, you might want to hit that subscribe button, because trust me, you'll want to see exactly how a replaceable coder made him pay. The HR woman cleared her throat, nudging the folder again. If you'll just sign the termination agreement. I stared at her, then back at Sterling's triumphant smirk. He had taken my work, my passion, and was now trying to steal my reward. He thought he had already won. Numbly, my hand reached out and pulled the folder toward me. I was fired, betrayed, and robbed, all in the space of 5 minutes, and in his mind, I was already gone. My fingers, numb and trembling, traced the edge of the thick folder. My programmer's brain, the part of me that debugs and finds logical fallacies, desperately tried to reboot. There had to be an error in his logic, a fatal exception. I couldn't let the program crash. Not my life's program. I opened the folder. My eyes scanned past the legalese, the standard non-disclosure agreements, until I found it. A copy of my original employment contract. My finger landed on the clause. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I pushed the folder back toward him, open to the page. "This isn't about what I deserve. This is about a contract. Section 4, subsection B. The bonus is calculated based on a percentage of AURA's net profit contribution. It's not listed as discretionary. It's a contractual obligation." I tried to appeal to the one thing a man like him should understand, a binding agreement. I pressed on, trying a different tack. And legally speaking aside, this is a terrible business decision. Aura isn't a toaster. You can't just hand the keys to a junior team in a different time zone. The system requires constant, nuanced maintenance. The predictive models need recalibrating based on shifting market data. It will fail. I guarantee it. All this profit you're so happy about will evaporate. My voice cracked on the last word. I gave 3 years of my life to this company. I built your golden goose from scratch. Doesn't that loyalty count for anything? Sterling stared at me for a long moment, his face a mask of corporate neutrality. Then a low chuckle escaped his lips. It wasn't a sound of humor. It was the sound of a lock clicking into place, the sound of a door slamming shut. The HR woman flinched beside me. "Loyalty?" he scoffed, the chuckle growing into a full, dismissive laugh that echoed in the sterile office. He picked up the folder and let it drop back onto the table. "My dear Anya, you were a highly paid contractor. Let's not get overly sentimental. You did a job. We paid you. This is the end of the transaction." He leaned forward again, that predatory glint back in his eyes. "And your contract?" He waved a hand dismissively. "You think our lawyers left us exposed to a coder with a grievance? Buried in the fine print is a clause that makes any and all bonuses contingent upon your status as an employee in good standing at the time of payout. And as of 10 minutes ago, you are not. You will get your 2 weeks severance, and that's it. You are owed nothing." He straightened his tie, the picture of untouchable power. "You built a very effective system. I commend you for it. But you seem to be operating under the delusion that this gives you some kind of ownership or permanent claim. It doesn't. We own the code, we own the profits, we own RA. We simply rented your brain for a while, and the lease is up. You are not needed. You are, as I said, replaceable." That's when it hit me, the finality of it. The cold, hard wall I had just run into at full speed. All my arguments, logic, law, loyalty, they were just pebbles thrown against a fortress. He wasn't listening. He had never been listening. To him, this conversation was a mere formality, a box to be checked on his way to saving a few dollars on my salary. My anger evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hollow space where my professional pride used to be. It felt like the air was being sucked out of the room. I looked past him, out the floor-to-ceiling window at the sprawling city below. Millions of lights, millions of people living their lives, completely unaware that mine had just been extinguished. I felt impossibly small. A bug he had just flicked off his expensive suit. "He's right," a voice whispered in the back of my mind. The thought was a shard of ice in my gut. I am replaceable. I am nothing. I had poured my soul into a machine, and the man who owned the machine was casting me aside like a used part. The money, the 7 figures that represented the sleepless nights and sacrificed years, was gone. My creation, my baby, was being handed over to people who wouldn't understand it, who would inevitably break it. I was powerless, fired, robbed, alone. The desperation was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. What was I going to do? Where was I going to go? My entire identity was wrapped up in being AURA's architect. Without it, who was I? Just another unemployed programmer. The HR woman slid a pen across the table. It came to a stop next to my hand. "Anya," she said softly, her voice full of practiced, meaningless sympathy. "If you'll just sign the exit papers, we can process your final paycheck." I stared at the pen, then at the signature line. It was a surrender. An admission that he had won, that I was nothing. My hand felt like it was encased in lead, but I knew I had no other choice. In this room, at this moment, I had lost. My hand hovered over the signature line, the cheap plastic pen feeling as heavy as a cinder block. This was it, the final keystroke in my own deletion. Signing this paper wasn't just accepting severance. It was validating everything Sterling had said, that I was redundant, that my work, my creation, could be taken from me, that I was, in the end, replaceable. The crushing weight of it all pressed down, and for a second, I thought I might actually throw up right on his obscenely expensive desk. Then, his words echoed in my mind, not the insults, but one specific, arrogant phrase: "We simply rented your brain for a while, and the lease is up." Rented. The word snagged, a syntax error in his triumphant monologue. My programmer brain, the part of me that lives to find logical inconsistencies and exploit them, flickered to life. A rental. A lease. Those are contracts. They have terms. They have conditions for breach. He was so busy gloating, he'd handed me the very framework I needed. My despair didn't vanish in a flash of righteous anger. It was colder than that. It was compressed into a single diamond-hard point of focus. My eyes lifted from the surrender of the signature line and darted back to the documents inside the folder. Not the termination agreement, but the other one, the one I'd pointed to earlier in a futile appeal to his sense of fairness, my original employment contract. He'd included a copy, an act of supreme arrogance meant to show me how thoroughly I was trapped. "Just sign the form, Anya," the HR woman urged softly. I ignored her, my fingers, no longer trembling, flipped through the pages. I wasn't looking at Section 4 anymore. I was hunting. I wrote code. I read contracts the same way, looking for definitions, dependencies, and loopholes. My eyes scanned headings: compensation, term of employment, confidentiality. And then I found it. Section 7, intellectual property and ownership. Sterling, who had turned to gaze out his window again, noticed the delay. "Is there a problem? It's a standard agreement. You won't find a single crack in it." His confidence was the final spark. My eyes devoured the dense paragraph. It was standard, just as he said. It outlined how all work product created for the company was the property of the company. Standard, except for one beautiful, glorious, and monumentally stupid sentence that I vaguely remembered my lawyer insisting on 3 years ago, when I was still a high-demand freelancer, and they were desperate to get me in-house. I almost laughed. There, in black and white, was the bug in his system. Clause 7.3, Transfer of Intellectual Property. It read, "All code, systems, and proprietary architecture, collectively the work, created by the employee shall be considered work for hire in the exclusive property of Innovate Dynamics, contingent upon the complete fulfillment of all financial remuneration obligations stipulated within this contract and its addenda. In the event of a material breach of said financial obligations by the company, including, but not limited to, the non-payment of contractually obligated bonuses, the intellectual property rights for the work shall revert to the employee, effective immediately." Revert to the employee. The air rushed back into my lungs. The office, the city beyond the glass, Sterling's smug silhouette, it all snapped into hyperfocus. He hadn't just stolen my bonus, he had triggered the self-destruct clause on his own ownership of Aura. He thought he was firing a replaceable coder. In reality, he had just defaulted on the loan for his entire company's nervous system, and I was the bank. The asset he claimed to own, the code he'd built his success on, it was mine again. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a programmer who has just found a fatal, system-crashing exploit. I calmly closed the folder. The weight on my chest was gone, replaced by an electrifying sense of power I hadn't felt even when I first brought Aura to life. He saw a magic button. I was about to show him the off switch, and I was the only person in the world who knew where it was. I stood up, clutching the folder to my chest like a winning lottery ticket. Sterling turned, an expression of annoyance on his face. "What are you doing? Sign the papers." "No," I said. My voice was even, devoid of the emotion that had choked me just minutes before. "I don't think I will." I held up the folder. "You were right about one thing, Mr. Sterling. This is about a contract, and I suggest you have your lawyers read it again, very, very carefully." I turned and walked toward the door, my heels clicking decisively on the polished floor. "Where do you think you're going?" "That's company property," he barked, gesturing at the folder. I paused at the door and looked back at him, at the first flicker of uncertainty in his cold eyes. "You said it yourself," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "You rented my brain, but you forgot to read the fine print on the lease." I allowed myself one last, chilling smile. "The lease is up, and I'm repossessing the property." I walked out of that glass-walled office without a single backward glance. The click of my heels on the floor sounded like a countdown. Every head in the open-plan office turned to watch me, a silent wave of curiosity and pity rippling through the cubicles. They saw a woman who had just been fired. They had no idea they were watching a ghost leave the machine. My heart was a jackhammer against my ribs, but my hands were steady. The trip home was a blur of traffic lights and street signs, my mind a million miles away, running through server architecture and access protocols. Sterling's arrogance was my greatest asset. He saw me as a disgruntled employee, not an existential threat. He'd have security revoke my key card, change my email password, the usual corporate sanitization. But he didn't understand that Aura and I were intertwined on a level he couldn't comprehend. I hadn't just built the house, I had built a hidden door for myself into every single room, and I still had the key. My apartment was less a home and more a command center. I bypassed my living room and went straight to my office, a small room dominated by a custom-built rig that made my setup at Innovate look like a child's toy. I sat down, the worn leather of my chair a familiar comfort, and took one slow, deliberate breath. Then, my fingers flew across the keyboard. I bypassed the standard VPN, tunneling through a series of private proxies until I emerged inside their network through a maintenance port I'd built into the core framework, a port that was undocumented and known only to me. My login wasn't my standard employee credential. It was the system's root administrator account, the digital equivalent of a god-level key. My access was absolute. A quick check of the logs confirmed my theory. They had, as predicted, deactivated my employee account, a smug little entry from a junior IT tech. It was like watching someone proudly lock the front door while I was already standing in the master bedroom. I wasn't there to steal data or cause random chaos. My plan was more elegant, more poetic. It was malicious compliance in its purest form. Sterling had defaulted on the contract. I was simply repossessing the property as the terms dictated. I wasn't going to just delete Aura. I was going to make Aura delete itself. For the next 2 hours, I coded with a focus I hadn't felt since the night I first brought the system online. I wasn't building. I was crafting a weapon. A small, elegant, and utterly lethal script that I named Clause 7.3. It was a dead man's switch, a digital heartbeat monitor. I embedded it deep within AURA's core kernel, camouflaging it as a routine diagnostic process. The script had one simple function. It would check a single condition at a precise time, 5:01 p.m. on the last day of the fiscal quarter, the exact moment my bonus was contractually due to be paid. It would scan for a wire transfer into my bank account for the exact amount stipulated in my contract. If the money was there, the script would delete itself, leaving no trace. Aura would continue to hum along, and they would never know how close they'd come to the abyss. But if the transfer was not detected, if they upheld their theft, the script would execute its payload. And the payload was my masterpiece. It wouldn't just erase the code. That was too simple, too recoverable from backups. First, it would initiate a series of cascading data corruption routines, targeting the primary and secondary databases. It would subtly transpose numbers, swap shipping addresses with billing addresses, and rewrite historical sales data with random noise. It would turn their pristine records into a Dali painting. Then it would begin systematically overwriting the company's off-site backups with gigabytes of corrupted, useless junk data. Only after it had poisoned the entire ecosystem, ensuring no recovery was possible, would it execute the final command, a recursive, system-wide deletion of itself, AURA, in every last line of my work. It would be as if it had never existed. They weren't just losing their golden goose, they were losing the last 3 years of their operational history. I knew what that meant. Aura saved them, by my conservative estimate, at least $40,000 a day in pure operational efficiency. I had built them an engine that printed money. The script I just wrote would turn that engine into a bomb. With the script armed and hidden, I logged out, severing my connection completely. I leaned back in my chair, a profound calm settling over me. The trap was set. An hour later, my personal phone buzzed. It was an email from HR, the formal termination letter. Attached was a note from Sterling, forwarded from his own account. Anya, as per our conversation, this confirms your termination. Your final severance check will be processed. I've been informed by IT that your system access has been fully and permanently revoked. The asset is secure. I wish you well. The sheer, unadulterated hubris of it. The asset is secure. He was mocking me one last time, gloating over his victory, assuring me that the prize was safely in his hands. He thought he had locked me out. He had actually just locked himself in with a ticking time bomb. I read his words, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. I didn't reply. I didn't have to. I just set my phone down, turned to my monitor, and began my own countdown. The days leading up to the end of the quarter were the longest of my life. I existed in a state of suspended animation, a ghost in my own apartment. I ate, I slept, I watched the news, but none of it registered. My entire consciousness was focused on a single invisible point in the future, 5:01 p.m. on the last day of Q4. The date circled in red on my digital calendar wasn't a deadline, it was a detonation timer. On the day itself, a strange calm descended. I didn't pace. I didn't chew my nails. I sat in my command center, the glow of my monitors painting my face in the dim light. On one screen, I had my online banking portal open, the balance displayed in stark, unforgiving numbers. On the other, a simple clock, counting down the seconds. There was nothing more to do. The code was written. The trap was set. The logic was absolute. Sterling had two options: honor the contract and pay me what I was owed, or steal from me and face the consequences. My script, my silent arbiter, would make the final judgment. At 4:55 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from a former colleague. Chaos here. All our shipping manifests are garbled. Warehouse is at a standstill. IT is blaming a server patch. I didn't reply. I just watched the clock. 4:58. My heart began to thud, a slow, heavy drumbeat against the silence. It wasn't fear. It was anticipation. The feeling a scientist gets just before a paradigm-shifting experiment concludes. 4:59. I watched my bank account. The balance remained unchanged. He was really going to do it. After all of it, after my private warning, his arrogance was so complete that he truly believed he was untouchable. He thought my threat was a bluff. 5 o'clock. The numbers on the clock clicked over. The bonus was now officially late, a material breach of contract. The seconds from 5 o'clock to 5:01 stretched into an eternity. 60 seconds for an entire corporate empire to hang in the balance. I held my breath. 5 hours, 0 minutes and 57 seconds. 5 hours, 0 minutes and 58 seconds. 5 hours, 0 minutes and 59 seconds. At 5:01 p.m., nothing happened. Not in my apartment anyway. There was no explosion, no flash of light, just the quiet hum of my computer's fans. But I knew that hundreds of miles away, in a climate-controlled server farm, a single, elegant line of my code had just asked a question, is the money there, and had received its answer, no. And then clause 7.3 began to execute its payload. I imagined the cascade, the subtle corruption starting in the sales database. A 1 becoming a 7. A shipping address in Ohio being swapped with a billing address in Brazil. The poison would be invisible at first, a few strange errors that the junior team in some offshore office would dismiss as glitches. But my script was patient. It would work its way through the terabytes of data, methodically, relentlessly turning their most valuable asset, their operational history, into digital gibberish. Then it would move to the backups, overwriting years of archive security with corrupted nonsense. And finally, when the system was nothing but a poisoned husk, it would devour itself. I sat there in the silence for another 10 minutes, then 20. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving behind a cold, clean certainty. I had done it. I closed the banking portal. The money didn't matter anymore. Justice did. Then at 5:28 p.m., my phone rang. The caller ID read, Richard Sterling. I let it ring 3 times before answering, my voice perfectly level. Hello? Anya, what the hell did you do? It wasn't the voice of a CEO, it was the raw, ragged shriek of a man watching his kingdom burn. The corporate polish was gone, stripped away by pure panic. I'm not sure what you mean, Mr. Sterling, I said, savoring the title. Aura. It's a nightmare. Nothing is working. The data is corrupt. The manifests are nonsense. We can't process a single order. The whole system is melting down. I was silent for a moment, letting him stew in the chaos he had created. That sounds unfortunate, I finally said. I did warn you that Aura was a complex system. It requires nuanced maintenance. Perhaps your junior team isn't up to the task. Don't play dumb with me, he screamed, his voice cracking. This isn't a glitch. This is sabotage. This is you. Our lawyers will ruin you. You'll be in prison for the rest of your life. I almost laughed. The bluster of a man with no cards left to play. Mr. Sterling, you seem to be operating under a delusion. I haven't accessed your network since the day you fired me. Your IT department can confirm that. You said so yourself, remember? The asset is secure. A choked, desperate sound came from the other end of the line. He knew. In that moment, he finally understood. He wasn't dealing with a disgruntled coder. He was dealing with a contract. The contract? He stammered, the fight completely gone from his voice. Clause 7.3. That's right, I said softly. The intellectual property. You defaulted on the lease, Richard. I'm simply repossessing my property. Fix it, he begged. The word was a pathetic, broken thing. Name your price, anything. Just make it stop. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the ceiling. I thought about the humiliation, the condescension, the theft. I thought of him telling me I was replaceable. The price was already named, I said, my voice as cold as a server room. It was in my contract. $1,754,000, the bonus you stole from me, plus a penalty, of course, for the late payment. I named a new number, a number with enough zeros to make my own breath catch. That's extortion, he gasped. No, I corrected him. It's the price of my replaceable expertise. You have 1 hour to make the wire transfer. After that, the price goes up. And Richard? I let the silence hang for a beat. There is no backup. There is no recovery. There is only me. The clock is ticking. I hung up, and I waited. 52 minutes later, my phone chimed. It was a notification from my bank. A wire transfer had just been received. I set the phone down on my desk, the plastic cool against the wood. The silence in my apartment was absolute, a stark contrast to the pandemonium I knew had just been unleashed in the Innovate Dynamics C-suite. For a moment, I allowed myself to picture it. Sterling, his face pale and slick with sweat, barking into a phone while frantic executives ran in and out of his office, their own faces masks of disbelief. The image brought me a grim, quiet satisfaction. My phone rang again less than a minute later. Richard Sterling, of course. He was a man who couldn't stand not having the last word. I let it ring, counting the chimes. 1, 2, 3, 4. On the 5th, I picked up. "Anya," he said. His voice was different now. The panicked screaming was gone, replaced by a strained, wheedling tone, the sound of a man trying to reason with a force of nature. "Anya, listen to me. We can be reasonable about this. There's no need for this nuclear option. I gave you the reasonable option 3 years ago when I signed my contract," I replied, my voice flat. "You're the one who chose this path. A lawsuit will bury you in legal fees for the rest of your life," he tried, one last, pathetic grasp at a threat. I laughed. The sound was sharp and humorless. "Go ahead, Richard. File the lawsuit. I can't wait to see the look on your shareholders' faces during discovery, when your own lawyers have to explain that you knowingly built your entire company on an asset you didn't legally own, that you tried to cheat the architect out of her contractually obligated pay, and in doing so, forfeited the IP for the one thing that makes your company profitable. The damages from that revelation alone will be catastrophic. Your stock will be worthless by lunch." Silence. I could practically hear him processing the inescapable truth of my words. The fortress of corporate power he'd lived in his whole life had just been revealed to be a house of cards, and I was holding the match. "Please," he whispered. The word was a surrender. The begging had begun. "Anya, please. You're destroying the company. There are hundreds of employees, people with families. Their jobs depend on this system. Their jobs depended on you being an honest man." I shot back, my voice turning to ice. "Their jobs depended on you honoring a contract. Don't you dare try to use them as a shield for your own greed. You were going to replace me with an offshore team to save a few bucks. You were going to throw me out with a meager severance package after I built your empire. You didn't care about anyone but yourself then, and you only care about them now because you're about to lose everything." "What do you want?" he asked, his voice cracking. "I can't authorize the number you named. It's impossible on this short notice." This was the real negotiation. The haggle, the desperate attempt to claw back some semblance of control. I would grant him none. "The contract was the law, Richard. You broke it. The judgment has been rendered," I said, my tone final. "Consider the number I gave you the price of the damages. It's non-negotiable. And you're wasting time. It's been 10 minutes. You have 50 minutes left." "I can't." "Every time you call me to argue," I interrupted, "the price is going to go up. Let's call it a penalty for your continued arrogance. A consulting fee." I did some quick, vicious math in my head. My old salary, the operational cost of Aura, the sheer audacity. You know what? The price just went up. The new number is $2 million. Flat. That's the original bonus, plus damages for breach of contract and the immense emotional distress you've put me through. $2 million. Wire it in the next 49 minutes, or I hang up, block your number, and let my script finish its work. By morning, Innovate Dynamics will be an empty digital shell. A long, shuddering breath came through the phone. It was the sound of a man staring into the abyss, the sound of utter, complete defeat. "Okay," he breathed. "Okay, $2 million. Don't hang up. I'm getting the CFO on the line right now. We'll do it. You have 48 minutes, I said, and hung up. I leaned back in my chair, my body humming with a strange, ferocious energy. I had him. The man who had called me replaceable, who had laughed in my face, was at this very moment scrambling to liquidate funds, begging his finance chief to authorize a multi-million-dollar payment to the coder he'd fired. He wasn't paying for code, he was paying for his hubris. He was paying for my name. The minutes ticked by, each one an eternity. 30 minutes left. 20. 10. With every passing second, the knot of tension in my stomach tightened. Was he bluffing? Was this a trick to try and trace me? No, he wasn't that smart, and he was too scared. He knew I held all the cards. Then, with 8 minutes to spare, my phone chimed. It wasn't a call, it was a notification from my bank. A simple, elegant little banner across the top of my screen. Wire transfer received. $2 million. The wire transfer notification chimed on my phone, displaying a number with enough zeros to make my breath catch in my throat. It was the exact price of my replaceable expertise, a 7-figure penalty for one man's monumental arrogance. I stared at the screen, at the clean digital confirmation of my victory. It wasn't a feeling of giddy excitement, not the thrill of winning the lottery. It was the cold, clean satisfaction of a complex program compiling without a single error. The logic was sound. The outcome was inevitable. My fingers flew across the keyboard one last time. I tunneled back into the Innovate Dynamics network, a ghost slipping through the walls of a house that was legally mine just moments ago. The panic was still palpable in the system logs, frantic, failed diagnostic commands from the offshore team, desperate attempts by internal IT to access locked-out directories. They were like ants scrambling over a sealed box. I navigated to the core kernel where my beautiful, lethal script was still patiently waiting. It had paused its data corruption routine, awaiting my command. I typed a single line, !execute.override.anya.disarm. The script, my digital arbiter, did one last thing. It purged the corrupted data it had already sown, restoring the system to the state it was in at 5 p.m. Then, it deleted itself so completely that not even a digital archaeologist could find a trace of its existence. My hidden door, my root access, my entire presence, gone. Aura was theirs again, whole and intact. The asset was, finally, secure. I severed the connection and leaned back. The silence of my apartment, a stark contrast to the boardroom drama I had just concluded. I had held a nuclear bomb over their heads, and they had paid the ransom. I never spoke to Richard Sterling again. But you can't make a $2 million emergency payment disappear. The story, as they always do, leaked. Not the specifics of Clause 7.3, but the gist of it. The board launched an internal investigation. They discovered that their star CEO had exposed the company to complete annihilation, not over a strategic disagreement or a market threat, but over a contractually obligated bonus for the very architect of their success. He tried to steal from an employee and nearly bankrupted the company in the process. His arrogance was no longer an asset, it was a catastrophic liability. He was quietly and unceremoniously forced to resign. He wasn't ruined financially, men like him never are, but his reputation was shattered. He became a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms about the coder who held an entire company hostage because her boss forgot to read the fine print. As for me, the money was a key. It unlocked a door I never knew I was standing in front of. I didn't buy a yacht or a mansion. I bought my freedom. I founded my own consultancy, a boutique firm specializing in what I ironically call intellectual property assurance. I'm the one companies hire now to audit their code and their contracts, to find the hidden back doors and fatal clauses before someone else does. I build systems for people who respect the architect. My life is no longer a blur of caffeine and dim lighting in someone else's office. It's a landscape of my own design, built from my own rules. That seven-figure sum in my bank account isn't just a number, it's a reminder. It's the price of being told I was replaceable. It's proof that the most valuable asset isn't the code, it's the mind that creates it. Sterling saw a magic button, but he never understood that the real power belongs to the one who knows how to unpush it. He thought he owned my work, but in the end, my work owned him. It's a hell of a story, and it taught me a lesson I'll carry forever. Always know your worth, and never ever sign a contract you haven't read from top to bottom. If you enjoy hearing about how the little guy can find a bug in the system, you should probably stick around and subscribe. Trust me, this is far from the only story I have to tell.